Hello, and thank you for tuning in. My name is Timothy Nagy. I'm a PhD candidate in theology at the University of Exeter, and today I have the privilege of recording this presentation at the historic Hepzibah House in New York City. The title of my presentation is Mission and Cognition, a Matter of Ambassadorship, and I'm going to jump right in. To set the stage, let us consider the famous evangelization conference, Lausanne 74. Missiologist Ralph Winter gave a now famous address at the conference that sparked 50 years of scholarship and mission work on what is now known as contextualization. His talk was titled The Highest Priority, Cross-Cultural Evangelism, and it really did shift the discipline of missiology in such a way that cross-cultural evangelism became the highest priority. Meanwhile, the social critic and author Os Guinness delivered a paper at Lausanne titled Evangelism Among Thinking People. His emphasis was on cross-cognitive efforts as a major facet of evangelism, particularly in the West. Guinness wrote, "We evangelicals who spare no effort to train a missionary to speak a foreign language must be as concerned to learn the intellectual, cultural, and artistic language of those around us in our own countries." Why didn't this type of cross-cognitive approach to mission develop the way that cross-cultural approaches did over the last 50 years? I believe there are at least three reasons. One, those engaged in missiology usually take the Bible seriously, and a biblical precedent has not yet been set for approaching mission cognitively. Two, just as learning a new language and culture are a huge task, becoming an expert in another academic discipline so that one can make connections between biblical teachings and secular concepts can be daunting, especially as disciplines continue to become more specialized in the Durkheimian sense. And three, as Guinness talks about in his paper, most Christians in the West have not been trained or encouraged to use their intellect to engage with secularism. As theologian Mark Knoll once rather harshly put it, the scandal of the evangelical mind is that there is not much of an evangelical mind. Of these three reasons, it is clear to me that locating a biblical precedent for engaging in a cognitive approach to mission is what would really pave the way for moving forward. Therefore, my main questions are, could there be a biblical theme that could provide a framework for doing this kind of research? If so, what biblical theme can be utilized by missiologists to further integrate cognitive approaches into missiology, and what would that look like? My thesis is that missiologists can utilize the biblical theme of ambassadorship to further integrate cognitive approaches into missiology because it provides a framework within which missiologists are positioned between academic disciplines and biblical teaching, and are encouraged to use the tools of cognitive linguistics to identify and construct metaphors that make biblical teaching accessible via secular knowledge. The green text here gets down to the cognitive approach that I'm arguing for, a model of ambassadorship with intentional intermediary work between academic disciplines and biblical teaching, empowered by the tools of cognitive linguistics, such as conceptual blending and metaphoric process, to actively identify and construct metaphors that communicate biblical teaching through secular knowledge. Now, why ambassadorship? It may seem like an insignificant theme given that it's only mentioned twice in the Bible, but it was integral to the life and theology of the Apostle Paul. As his letters to early church communities demonstrate, Paul's ambassadorship was deeply dependent on his ability to make connections between secular concepts and spiritual concepts, and that this ability was directly impacted by his oneness with Christ and his connections within his ministry network. Even in 2 Corinthians alone, New Testament scholar Carl Lim notes four metaphors: the sibling, familial, temple, and body metaphors. He writes, "Metaphors were not mere cognitive devices to shape and govern the way one thinks and behaves, but were also an integral part of Paul's proclamation of the gospel, aiming to realign the Corinthians to the fundamental truth of his gospel of Christ crucified." Paul's ministry of reconciliation through ambassadorship was not simply characterized by preaching a message of reconciliation, but preaching a reconciled message, in which the secular concepts were reconciled to spiritual concepts. The theme of reconciliation as it relates to ambassadorship is also key for interdisciplinary mission theology. The reconciliation of secular concepts and biblical concepts can be seen as an endeavor of pre-evangelism, tilling the soil for the evangelist's seeds or re-enchanting the missional context for evangelism. Paul's network of co-workers is well documented and illustrates his dependence on insiders in the communities to which he wrote. Pauline scholar Kathy Ahrensberger helps us see that Paul was not the independent hero fighting against all odds that we tend to think of him as. Furthermore, she helpfully denotes Paul as one who is at the crossroads of culture, theologizing in the space between. One of the main aspects of the crossroads of culture is cognitive space, and Paul's ability to be effective in that space through the creative blending of spiritual and secular concepts, the body, athletics, legal affairs, warfare, civic ceremonies, many others, is a large part of his effectiveness as an evangelist and church planter. This ambassadorial work of theologizing in the space between is not just cultural, but very much cognitive as well, since we are not part of Paul's culture, yet we understand more of the gospel and the realities of the Christian faith due to his cross-cognitive approach, as evidenced by his metaphors, life, and network. And we see this in Christ's life as well, but I'm not going to take the time to go into that right now. What could a cognitive approach to mission look like today? Missiologist Kenneth Nairbass recently offered the image of a river as a metaphor to account for increased interdisciplinarity among missiology's influences. I think this is a helpful image. As you see in the diagram, there are several tributaries which represent the different academic disciplines informing missiological research, as well as several distributaries which represent mission strategies that have developed as a result of the interdisciplinary insights from upstream. Simply put, I'm advocating for further inflow from the tributary of cognitive linguistics, and I foresee interdisciplinary mission theology as the distributary output. My working term for this model, as I mentioned a couple times earlier, is interdisciplinary mission theology, because it closely relates to Charles Van Engen's approach called mission theology. Van Engen's three-circled Venn diagram is shown with the concept of an integrating theme in the overlapping space in the middle. This figure ensures that the integrating theme relates to categories A, B, and C: biblical text, faith community, and missional context. To integrate the cognitive aspect of culture, I alter the diagram by substituting faith community with the academy. I envision this diagram as a way of describing the same dynamic of Paul at the crossroads and doing his theologizing to identify and construct conceptual integrations, metaphors, to better communicate his message. As an example, let us consider holiness as an integrating theme. Holiness would be defined biblically. An academic discipline would be chosen from which conceptual comparisons could be made, and this would then lead to the identification and construction of conceptual integrations for the missional context. If the chosen discipline was art history, many comparisons could be made right off the bat. However, if the chosen discipline was electrical engineering, say, making comparisons may seem near impossible. In a sense, this model is much like a laboratory of theologizing, including much trial and error and comparison. The ability to identify or construct conceptual metaphors, integrations, could only truly be obtained by a polymath. But the theme of ambassadorship dispels and even discourages the need for that kind of individual interdisciplinary mastery due to the dependency on a network of insiders. The ultimate vision for this model is for missiologists to do the foundational work of identifying and constructing conceptual integrations between biblical concepts and secular concepts. These missiologists could act like consuls within certain disciplines, able to be insiders for the ambassadors, whether evangelists, missionaries, or preachers, who are ministering in contexts within which those conceptual integrations could help till the soil, re-enchant the missional context, for the seeds to be planted and for the gospel to take root. I have displayed some books here on this penultimate slide, just to show some of the key scholarship that I'll be working with. In addition to those texts, George Lakoff, Gilles Fauconnier, Mark Turner, John Sanders, Robert Masson, and Adam Zamorak will be my main interlocutors for the cognitive linguistic material that I'll be getting into. And I must mention the work of Dan Shaw on bringing insights of cognitive studies into the river of missiology. He's the pioneer, and he's made that initial connection to the river, and it's inspired me to keep those insights flowing. So I really appreciate the time Thank you for tuning in and listening to me today. Take care and be in touch. My info's there.